Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Reimagined Energy. Recently, I had the opportunity to attend the Smart Energy Conference in Halifax. It was a great conference. I was a sponge during the whole time. And during that time, I attended an EV landscape session where David Adams was one of the panelists. David Adams, he's the president and CEO of Global Automakers of Canada. A really great guy. I took down a lot of questions to ask him today. So let's get started. Hi, everyone, and hi, David. Welcome.
Thanks very much, Maria. Glad to be here.
Yes, it's wonderful. So we met briefly at the Smart Energy Conference just
We
recently,
did.
and it was great to talk with you. And I know you're with the Global Automakers of Canada. So tell me a little bit about what your organization is and what you do.
Sure. So the Global Automakers of Canada is a national trade association that represents the interests of the international automakers in the Canadian marketplace. So within our membership, we have 15 member companies. We have two vehicle manufacturers that are part of our group. So Toyota and Honda. Toyota being the largest manufacturer in Canada,
Right?
and Honda being the third largest manufacturer in Canada. The other 13 members are the exclusive Canadian distributors of their brand in the Canadian marketplace. So, for instance, BMW Canada or Volkswagen Canada, Kia Canada, they're all of our members as well. And a lot of what we do is advocacy work and government relations work, primarily with federal government, but also with provincial governments as the need arises. And a lot of the issues that we're working on these days tend to be oriented around environmental issues, as you might imagine. So, yeah, that's who we are and what we do in a nutshell.
Well, that is great because it sounds like you have your hands full as you're all getting ready for the EV adoption in Canada. It's already taken place?
Well, yeah, it's we're I wouldn't say getting ready for it. We're well into it at this
Yeah.
point, and I would say that it's going to be an ongoing disruption essentially in the industry for the foreseeable future, and it's linked at the same time to a number of other things that are going on at the industry level that are really sort of transforming the industry from what it was to what it will be in the future. And those other issues include things like automated and connected vehicles, the digitization of the consumer experience, from buying a vehicle at a physical dealer to purchasing a vehicle in some cases totally online, but in other cases doing much of the transaction online. So a lot of disruption going on in the industry, but one of the issues that we're quite focused on now is this transition to electrification.
Yes. At the conference, you sat in on a panel on EV landscape and you sat with
Right.
others. And I took a lot of notes and I wrote down a few questions in advance that I just want to ask you. You
Sure.
had mentioned you guys were talking about supply chain, and also some of the constraints that are being faced. Do you want to talk a little bit about those?
Sure. I guess so. There's a couple of things. I guess if you look at it from a government policy perspective, governments around the world are looking to try and mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And in Canada, transportation is the second largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And if you break down transportation and look at the light duty vehicle sector, which is our members, that's about 50% roughly of overall transport emissions. Or if you look at all the emissions in Canada, light duty vehicles are about 10%. So not a huge amount, but not an insignificant amount either. So I think federal governments and provincial governments, because the environment is a shared jurisdiction, have both been looking at ways to reduce emissions from transportation, amongst other sources. And one of the ways that they've been looking at it is this transition to zero emission vehicles or electric vehicles. So, really, if you're generating the electricity for those vehicles from clean or renewable power sources, then effectively the fuel is green, and the vehicle itself is not producing any greenhouse gas emissions. So governments largely are looking to zero emission vehicles as a key way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the light duty vehicle sector.
Yeah, I mean, there's the electricity side of it as well. It's like the fuel, for these vehicles, which is electricity. You had mentioned, there's at currently, if everyone in Canada had an EV or something, there's not enough electricity to go around to power them or recharge.
Well, I think the real challenge is just as society electrifies. So it's not just the vehicles. It's if we're going to meet our overall emissions reduction targets, then everything essentially needs to electrify. And Royal Bank did a study a couple of years back, and it's been buttressed and confirmed by other studies that have been done, that we essentially need to double or triple our electricity generation capacity in Canada if we're going to be able to do that. So I think that's, as we move down this path to electrified vehicles, that's, you asked about constraints and concerns. That's one of the concerns that I think automakers have is, will there be enough electricity? And, there may well be enough electricity, but will our transmission lines and distribution lines be updated and modernized to accommodate that extra electricity?
Yeah, they
Other
talked a lot about that during the conference. It's just,
Yeah,
making sure the grid is right.
yeah. Other constraints, are things, again, that are concerning the manufacturers, are the things that obviously are outside of their control. So will there be, enough, well, it's not a question of, are there enough materials to make batteries? There probably are, but the question is, can we get them out of the ground, processed into batteries to meet the rapid ramp up in zero emission vehicle demand that there's going to be? And if you look at some of the critical minerals for batteries, it's estimated that globally we're going to need about 375 new mines to, with
Wow.
different, whether it's lithium or graphite or what have you, to be able to build all the batteries that we need. And if you start working back at, from a timing perspective, typically you can't get a new mine onboarded anywhere. It takes somewhere between 10 and 15 years to get a new mine up and running. And clearly we don't have that much time to get these mines up and running to produce the batteries that we need to make
Yeah,
the vehicles that we need to meet the targets that have been set out in some of the regulations.
that's amazing. Yeah, the mining comment, is the one that really, threw me for a loop, to meet the demands of the battery. So that's why there's a lot of advancement that is needed in the battery technology to make them last longer and stronger somehow.
No, I think, and that's one of the other challenges, I guess, too, is that nobody really knows what the battery chemistry of the future is going to be. There's it's kind of much like, so vehicles have changed from a mechanical device to being more of an electronic device, much like your cell phone. And it's just like, every year there's a new iteration of an iPhone that, has a better camera and a longer lasting battery and that sort of
Bigger,
thing.
better,
So,
faster. Yeah.
yeah. So this is a real challenge with battery technology, right? Is that nobody really knows what the battery technology of the future is going to be. And if you're asking companies to commit, hundreds of millions of dollars to opening up a new mine to mine a particular critical mineral that's necessary for the batteries of today, but may not be necessary for the batteries of tomorrow, then you're in a situation where, you have stranded capital and you're putting a lot of time, money, and effort into something that may not be required. So there's a lot of uncertainty out there, and a lot of on a lot of fronts. And I think that's, business always likes certainty, and it's some of these things are just disconcerting when others say, vehicle manufacturers are going to have a hard enough time just uh, building the vehicles, let alone worrying about all of the different pieces of the puzzle that need to be put in place to ensure this transition goes smoothly and towards electrification.
You had mentioned how China has the most capability of processing the minerals that go into the batteries.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's because China, was an early adopter and really focused on the electrification of vehicles. Sort of largely before anybody else did. They have a competitive advantage in that space now. They have all virtually, well, and in most cases, pick an item, whether it's processing, it's battery development, it's some of the raw materials. China is got the lion's share of the market, and I think that's why you're seeing, for instance, the United States respond in kind by sort of being a little bit behind the eight ball and recognizing that the future is going to be electric, and also recognizing that they don't have, they're sort of in the same position with China as they used to be with the OPEC countries as far as oil is concerned. So they don't want to be beholden to a foreign jurisdiction that may not be a friendly jurisdiction for all the batteries, battery components, all the processing of the minerals and all that sort of thing. So the United States and Canada as well, I think, have put a keen focus on trying to ensure that we're building out a lot of that, those mines, the critical minerals, processing capability in North America as such, so that they can be a little bit more masters of their own destiny with respect to the development and building of not only the batteries but the vehicles themselves.
The infrastructure. We can't have a
Yep.
conversation about EVs and anything to do with roads, or even infrastructure isn't only about the highways. It's about the charging. It's about uh, the ratios you had mentioned, the
Sure.
IEA, and something to do with California. Can you tell everyone a little bit about that side of things?
Sure. I mean, infrastructure is key, and I think the CAA actually sponsored our panel on Monday that I spoke at, and they released a report relatively recently, I think just a couple of weeks ago, that surveyed EV owners, and EV owners were typically saying they were really enjoyed their vehicles, were thrilled with their vehicles, would probably not go back to driving an internal combustion engine vehicle, but even with as much as they liked their vehicles, they were still very concerned about the charging infrastructure. And, we've always said as an industry that charging infrastructure, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg issue, but the charging infrastructure really needs to be in place to provide consumers with the confidence that they can buy a vehicle and, just like a gasoline station, they can find a place relatively easy to charge it when they need to charge it. Because right now, it's still a situation where, you don't see signs on the side of the highway saying that, in most cases anyway, saying there's an EV charging station at the next exit, like you do gasoline signs. And it's really a situation too, as well. How much is the right amount of infrastructure? And, from our perspective, you mentioned the International Energy Agency. I think their sort of benchmark is that jurisdictions should have, one sort of EV charging station for every 9 EVs on the road. I think Europe has a slightly different metric. I might get my numbers mixed up, but they're either 1 in 10 or 1 in 7, and California is either 1 in 7 or 1 in 10. I forget which is which, just off the top of my head. But, even if you look at California, it's a jurisdiction, much smaller than Canada is as a nation. Same number of vehicles on the road, but they're suggesting that even with their smaller geographic footprint, again, I forget the ratio, but it's either 7 to 1 or 10 to 1. And Canada, in terms of the analysis that Natural Resources Canada is undertaking to look at this, has suggested, oh, well, we think 24 to 1 is the right ratio. And, we just, we have a hard time as an industry seeing how that could be possible, given that we're a much larger jurisdiction, a colder jurisdiction in the wintertime when there tends to be battery degradation. So, we believe we need a lot more than the 24 to 1 ratio that's been suggested in consultants' reports to the federal government. And one last thing I would say on it is that I think you almost need to overbuild the infrastructure at the front end to provide consumers with that confidence. Some of those stations ultimately may not be needed and could potentially be decommissioned. You don't want to put in infrastructure needlessly, but if we really want to encourage consumer adoption, then consumers need to know that they can charge their vehicle wherever. And for people that live in a detached home and have a garage and can put a charging station in their garage, it's you're going to do. The statistics are 80% of the people do most of their charging at home. Well, if you have a home that accommodates that, that's great. But there are 30% of Canadians that live in multi-unit rental buildings, and that's a different proposition to try and get chargers in those. So, what we really need is the regulations to be updated to ensure that anytime builders are building new condos, new MURBs, what have you, that part of the building requirement is that you at least build in the capability to put charging stations into those units, because it's way easier to put the units in once you have the carve out done to ensure that the stations can be deployed in the buildings than trying to retrofit them after the fact.
Do you think it should be up to the manufacturers to create the infrastructure? When you look at Tesla, they have the Tesla superchargers. There's the Volkswagens of the world, and there's the other Honda and Toyota. I guess when you look at it, when you have the Essos and the Petro-Canada, they don't have their own make and models of cars. So I guess throwing it out there, do you think that there should be maybe universal charging, and should it be up to the manufacturer to work, with these?
Yeah, I mean, and you raised Tesla, and Tesla's an interesting example, because if you look at their whole business model was predicated, I mean, they're a new car company. Their only product is electric vehicles. So for their business model to work, they need to have they absolutely need to build out their own infrastructure. They weren't saying to government, "Oh, well, we're building an electric car, but you build out the infrastructure for us." But I think for traditional automakers that are involved in this transition, it's hugely capitally expensive to make that transition, to build the vehicles, to build the batteries to support the vehicles. That by and large, manufacturers don't look at it as their job to put the infrastructure in place as well. You have seen some exceptions to that. So Volkswagen, for instance, had a ownership stake, I think they still do, in Electrify America, Electrify Canada, which is responsible for building out some infrastructure. It's not their own particular brand per se, like Tesla is, but those stations would be open to any other EV as well. But that's more the exception than the norm. Typically, what happens is that different manufacturers will collaborate with charging station providers, whether it's Flow or ChargePoint or what have you, to say, okay, well, we've struck an agreement with our with a charging station provider. When a consumer buys their vehicle, that they might get a discounted rate or a certain number of kilometers free with their particular charging station provider. But the real challenge is just there's too many different types of charging station providers out right now as well, which would be no problem if they all sort of operated the same way. And, you could pay by credit card, but that's not the
Right.
norm. The norm is that, every charging station seems to have a different app that you have to download, and,
Exactly.
you need a different card that you might need. So you can have a wallet full of cards,
Need the
and
adapter to go along with it.
yeah,
Yeah.
some want you to put that deposit down, so that so this sort of thing. So it's certainly not convenient for consumers, the charging infrastructure that we have right now, for sure. And the other challenge that I've experienced myself is just the uptime of the charging infrastructure. There's nothing more frustrating to an EV driver to have whatever 40 kilometers left and go to a fast charger somewhere, only to find out that, oh gee whiz, it's not working. And then you might be hard pressed to find another station that you can get to with the limited range that you still have on your vehicle. So I know that's something we've been encouraging the federal government and their new contracts, where they're trying to encourage doing RFPs for the installation of charging infrastructure. That part of that RFP would be an uptime requirement, so that these charging stations are maintained, and there is a performance metric built into that contract.
That would be really helpful. So last question is, what is your organization doing? What does the next 6 months to a year look like? What projects are you working on? That sort of thing.
Sure. I mean, one of the things that we will be working on for the remainder of the year, we talked a little bit about it at the session, is the federal government has introduced a zero emission vehicle mandate, which is similar to what California has had in place for some time, which is basically would require manufacturers. The proposal is to require manufacturers to have 20% of their sales be EV by 2026, at least 60% by 2030, and then 100% by 2035. From our perspective as an association, we've always maintained that the focus should be on greenhouse gas emissions reduction, and sort of let the vehicle manufacturers figure out what the best way is to achieve that target number that the government sets. Because within my own membership, for instance, I have some that are very much further along the electrification landscape, and others that are not so far along. They might have just launched or in the process of launching their first EV. It seems to us to be a bit of a perplexing dynamic when you have some vehicle manufacturers that have the lowest GHG emissions as a manufacturer across their fleet, but yet, because they're not deploying electric vehicles, are going to be penalized under a zero emission vehicle mandate. So that's something that we'll be working on. There's also, we can't ever lose sight of what's happening in the U.S. With the industry in Canada. And, last week, the president, or actually the EPA administrator, fulfilled the president's goal of releasing a notice of proposed rulemaking, which is sort of the first step of their regulatory process to put in more stringent greenhouse gas emission standards beyond 2026 out to 2032, I believe. And, what our initial analysis of those regulations, which Canada, by the way, adopts as a matter of course. We incorporate those by reference up here because it's an integrated industry. Our fleets are generally the same. That those new standards will probably deliver the same number of electric vehicles that Canada is hoping to achieve through a ZEV mandate. So it seems to us that the ZEV mandate is a bit of an unnecessary sort of belt and suspenders approach to achieve the same goal, but that it adds a lot of unnecessary regulatory burden on manufacturers in Canada and causes a lot of unintended consequences as well. Other things that we're working on that are related to is that, the whole notion of circular economy, for instance, has been a big issue, across sectors for a while. and we've seen sort of stewardship initiatives initially in things like traditional car batteries, the 12-volt batteries, or tires, or things like that. Some of the fluids, antifreeze in vehicles, ensuring that these are disposed of and taken care of properly. And there's a broader initiative, I think, ongoing now as more electric vehicles are put on the road, in terms of governments and whatnot being concerned about, oh, well, what happens to the battery at the end of the life of the vehicle? And while I could say, okay, it's maybe a legitimate concern, what I would say is that it's not in the same context as, or it's not the same type of issue as, tires or something like that, where there's maybe not a lot of value associated with tires. That batteries are extremely valuable, and the only way that we're going to be able to kind of meet our battery production targets is to take those batteries at the end of their useful life and recycle them appropriately, and again draw out all of the critical minerals and raw materials and reuse those to make new batteries and new battery components. So that's a related but another sort of set
That
of
will be
discussions
interesting.
and dialogue that we're going to be pursuing over the course of the next year or so, I'm sure, anyway.
Yeah, I like that idea about, the recycling part for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, David, for your time today. I know you're a very, very busy guy, and it was great to meet with you this week. And, best wishes to you and your organization, and all the things that you're going to be working on the next little while.
Well, thanks to you, Maria, and thanks for having me on the podcast. I appreciate it.
All right, have a great day.
You too.
Well, there you have it. That was David, who gave us a really good snapshot about the manufacturer's side to the adoption of EVs and the creation of EVs to get into more driveways in Canada, into more parking lots. It gave us a different perspective from the manufacturer's point of view. And I really hope that today's discussion kind of got some ideas sparked in you, and it broadened your knowledge a little bit about the EV landscape in Canada. I'm Marie McGowan. Thanks for joining today. Make sure you hit that subscribe button so you can listen in every week and get everything you can on all about reimagined energy. Have yourself a great day, and thanks for tuning in.